Should I buy a property in Palm Beach County without doing an inspection? Today, I want to tell you guys a story. Let's flash back to 2009. This would have been probably my fourth or fifth transaction. For those of you that don't know, 2009 down in South Florida was a brutal marketplace. It was very much a buyer's marketplace. And there was a lot of perceived value. Things were selling at, 50 to 70% off of what they had just sold for a couple of years ago. So a lot of people saw value, a lot of investors were making offers. So in this particular condo, somebody called me up and said, I saw this condo online and I want to make an offer on it. Can you help me out? And I said, sure. And so we started going through the contract specifics, and I said, I recommend doing an inspection period. And he said, okay, great, let's do that. So we put the contract together, got our inspection period in the contract, got the contract signed by the seller's side. Clock starts ticking. And the buyer said to me, well, I just really need to look at the rules of the condo. I don't want to do a physical inspection of it. And I was fairly new to real estate, but I knew that probably wasn't a good idea. Encouraged him to do it. He said, no, I really don't want to do that. I don't need it. It's not a big deal. I said, okay. So we went ahead, moved forward with the contract. Now fast forward to the day before closing. You have to do a final walkthrough on properties. So the day that I showed him the property, I had gone to the property, I took a bunch of photos that day, but his contract got executed a few days later. So there's a little bit of a time in between what I had documented and the execution of the contract. And now here we are, the day before property's supposed to close, or I think it was the morning of. Anyways, I go to do the walkthrough and a water heater is leaking water out of the closet where the water heater and the air conditioning were, and it's kind of running down the unit. And this is a first floor unit, so it was draining out the balcony door, and it wasn't a huge leak, but there was a slow stream of water moving down the property. And I freaked out, and I called up the buyer's attorney, and I told him what was happening. And he said, well, the sellers are already here and they've signed the documents, so why don't you come to the office and let's try to work this out. And I said, okay. So I drove over to his office, and the first thing the seller's attorney said to me is, where's your inspection report? And I said, well, we didn't do an inspection report. I have these photos from a couple of days before it, but we don't have an inspection report. And he said, well, how do you know that the property wasn't leaking water when you guys were doing your inspections? And I said, well, I have these photos from a couple of days before we did the contract. And he said, but you have no inspection report, so you can't prove it. And it really backed me into a corner. The long story, unfortunately short for myself involved, was I felt so bad about the whole thing that I forfeited my real estate commissions to have, cover the buyer's costs of repairing everything, and ended up having to pay taxes on income I didn't receive. And, it was a big mess. But the lesson that I learned from it is you do a property inspection so you can document the condition of the property within your inspection period. That gives you the ammunition that now, had I gone to do this final walkthrough and the water's leaking, I can go back and say, listen, seller, the property wasn't leaking. Here's my inspection report. I can prove it to you. So oftentimes I'll have people say, look, it's only a condo. They're only going to look at the appliances. It's not worth it. And I relay this story to everybody and explain to them, look, this is the reason that you do it. So I'm relaying that story onto you guys to say, yes, you need to do an inspection if you're buying a property. During COVID, when a lot of people were waiving inspections, I never did a transaction where anybody waived an inspection. It's not something I'm for. I saw the litigation risk of it, so I didn't want to get involved in it, but I just don't think it's a good idea to ever waive inspections. Very few circumstances, like if you're buying something for tear down, that you could consider doing it, but even then, still not going to recommend that you do it. As far as property inspectors go, as a real estate agent, I don't really care who you use as property inspector. The only thing I do say is make sure whoever you use is insured so that if they miss something, you can have recourse against their insurance policy for their error, and it can help make you whole if your inspector missed something. So I hope my story helped you guys out. If you're considering buying a property in Palm Beach County, please give me a call, 786-443-7203. You can also text me if you want, or send me an email. I'll put my email address below. It's caseybrindle@gmail.com. And if you just want to learn about some market statistics, you can visit homesaroundjupiterfl.com. Click the blog, and I'll give you some up-to-date market statistics. I do it in video form to make it even more entertaining for you. So that's what I got, folks. See you on the next video.